In today's video, we're going to look at the regeneration of Birmingham as part of this structural change case study. So the first place to start is since the industrial decline, where the worst was when they had nearly 20% unemployment in the 80s, but it's now 8% in 2020. It's not as good as the UK average. It shows there's still improvement to be done, but we can see that Birmingham has gone from a city of manufacturing in the 70s to a city dominated by services, and this has been largely due to the big regeneration done by some certain groups and organisations in the city. The major losses have been in the car manufacturing and other traditional industries like engineering, but also there's been some gains in services, specifically financial services, tourism and leisure. I'm going to now look at the organisations that have been involved in that. I'm going to start with the role of government. So Birmingham since the 70s has been trying to diversify away from those traditional industries. They've tried to build the city as a place for business tourism, as financial services, regional centre for trade, but also a retail and tourism hub. And so lots of the projects and funds that they've gone for have tried to do this, get away and build services and new investment into the city. So one of them is the NEC, which is the National Exhibition Centre. The government petitioned for investment to be given to Birmingham so they could build this on the west side of the city. And at the same time, they petitioned for Birmingham Airport to be expanded. So the local government were doing this because they knew that when they got those both work in conjunction, they could get these major international exhibitions and conferences to the region, which means that they would get a lot of money. So they partly did this by accessing funding schemes that were from national government. So the single regeneration budget, which was a budget used to build projects in deprived areas, and the City Challenge. So this is where local government and national government working together to try and develop areas. One of these ways was in the 80s, development corporations were set up. These were organisations that were trying to plan and regenerate deprived areas. And there was the Birmingham Heartlands Development Corporation, and they were trying to do the industrial areas of Birmingham. They got 100 million from the government, but they also got 200 million from other investors and the EU, which I'll come back to later on. One of the examples is this Nayshells power station, which the corporation regenerated and turned into Star City, which was a entertainment and leisure complex that brought in new opportunities in services and brought new investment into the area, and completely cleaned up this old industrial site. Similarly, the corporation built Bordersley Village near Birmingham City Stadium. It's that kind of green area and the housing around it. They got rid of all the terrace housing that was run down, and they replaced it with these nice semi-detached housing for low-income earners, lowering the entire density of the area. So, as I said, these were kind of projects that the local government worked on in conjunction with national government, and that it also tapped into things like the New Deals for Community scheme, which was a government-led scheme to try and reduce deprivation at neighbourhood level. And part of that scheme, Birmingham actually got some areas there broadband upgraded and also work experience program set up, and one of those areas was Aston, so it helped the communities in that area. I talked about EU investment, so this is where local government works with EU. So the council actually gained funds from the EU for projects. The Social Investment Fund gave them 235 million over a number of years, and also the Regional Development Fund gave them money to kind of help look after their landmarks, improve the social housing. So that's what we're talking about, Bordersley Village back there, and build space for small enterprises. The thing I need to talk about is planning and flagship developments. So this is the idea that the city wants to make important physical changes to the city. They do this through having a really clear plan, but also building these flagship projects, which I'll come into a second. These are the hope that if I make physical change, it will actually lead to social and economic benefits for the city. One of these is Centenary Square. It was originally built in the 20s. On the left, that's a picture of it in the 90s, but they just refurbished it. they upgraded this public space, a space that people were going to spend a lot of time in, reconstructed it. Similarly, in Victoria Square, which is where the old town hall is, they refurbished that as places that people actually wanted to spend time outside at. One of the biggest things was the flagship projects. The flagship projects are essentially large infrastructure projects. They're normally one-offs and they're very expensive. The ones they built in Birmingham were the ICC, the International Conference Centre, and the Symphony Hall. They were opened in the 90s and they were both very expensive. This was where local government was again working with the EU. So it got 50 million to help with the the construction of those projects, even though they kind of cost 200 million. So there was other investment as well. So the great thing about the ICC is that it kind of brings in a lot of income by hosting national and international conferences. So bringing people into the city to use the conference centre and then the kind of services around it. Bill Clinton was famously there in the G8 summit, and this was good because it got international recognition for Birmingham as a major kind of centre for important events. Similarly, the kind of Symphony Hall has the Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, and this changes the cultural landscape of Birmingham. It kind of a national orchestra basically says that it's away from that idea of it being a rundown city, and it's actually a place where internationally acclaimed orchestra exist. The NIA is another flagship project that was built, and that has drawn in more tourists for large sporting events, including the 22 Commonwealth Games. All of these flagship projects help create a multiplier effect. They bring people into the city, and these people need to use hotels and restaurants and other facilities, and therefore those are established, and then that brings more money into the economy. So success breeds more success by more services needed off the back of these initial projects. Other things that have improved, there's key services in the city improved. The retail centre, the Bull Ring, which was initially built in the 60s and by this picture in the 90s was pretty run down. That was demolished and rebuilt, and they put in some pretty radical designs to do that. And Birmingham has now become a really key regional and national hub for retail. It's got really impressive buildings like this Selfridges store, which is its kind of flagship building. They've also built library services, a new library in Centenary Square, which shows you again that lots of flagship projects are built close to each other to draw in this mass of tourists. The last place to talk about in planning is the fact that the kind of environment has actually been improved. So not only have these public spaces been built, and they've built street furniture and kind of monuments and public arts, but also the canals have been cleaned up. So Brindley Place is a place where now that is for tourists, but it was once a kind of industrial area, and players like the local government working with organisations like the Canal and River Trust to help regenerate and clean up these areas. I talked about the cultural and environmental change, but also we've seen other changes. So Birmingham's got 3 main universities. This brings in 50,000 students, which is important. But this changes the demographics of the city. It makes it a younger place and takes away from that old industrial image. But these are important players because they spend a lot of money. There's people employed actually to work in these universities, but also the students spend money on housing and services. And so again, it's adding more and more money into the economy and improving the social economic conditions in the city. The last thing I'm going to look at is transport. So Birmingham's always had a legacy of being well connected. We talked about the canal network before, but the national network of motorways. We've got the M6 that links the M1, the M42 Ring Road and the M5, showing that this is a well-connected area. And these motorways that are built since the 60s have meant that there is more opportunities for people to actually come to the city because it's so well connected to the rest of the country. What they're trying to do is build on some of the infrastructure. So Birmingham New Street has just had a huge revamp, 700 million gone into that. And as part of that, they've actually developed the shopping centre called the Grand Central above it. They've refurbished that, which has brought in 1,000 jobs. And there's new services, shops and restaurants that have been created as part of that refurbishment. The big project, though, is related to HS2. So HS2 is a high-speed railway network that is starting in London, is going to link Birmingham and northern cities. The government have done this as a flagship development for the country to try and stop the gap between the north and the south in terms of wealth and income, and they want to use this railway as a catalyst for growth. So by connecting it to the capital, they're going to hopefully make these northern cities that they're connected to into economic powerhouses. One of the ways it's going to connect is the fact that the journey time between Birmingham and London is going to be 45 minutes. It's currently an hour and a half. And that means that there is better connections, so people can move between the cities better. That means trade can be easier and more investment can be done into the city. Lots of players involved in this, local council, big engineering TNCs like Lane O'Rourke, who are building Curzon Station and Scanza, but also community groups who are involved, and also NGOs like the National Trust, who are interested in the kind of environmental impacts of such a big project. The last thing to kind of really mention is to say that obviously this is going to end up in Birmingham, the first phase, and so they are building a whole new station there to meet to actually have a hub for it, and this is going to be good for the city because they're actually going to redevelop the areas around it. So East Side and Digbeth are the areas right next to the station, and they're actually the city is going to spend a lot of time redeveloping those areas to bring opportunities to those areas. The council has hoped that this regeneration off the back of HS2 will bring at least 36,000 jobs and 1.4 billion in economic uplift. So we can see how lots of players are involved in HS2, and hopefully it could boost Birmingham from an area that was kind of industrial decline. Its service industry is on the way up, but hopefully they can reduce the unemployment rate down even further below 8%, to make it to a really important economic powerhouse in the Midlands area.